I fed a homeless man, got fired immediately, but what he said opened a door to a life I never imagined. I always knew something was off in my family, not in a dramatic, movie-worthy way, just a dull, constant feeling that I didn't belong, like being a guest in your own home. My younger brother, Jacob, was the golden child, the kind of kid parents showed off at dinner parties. Straight A's, captain of whatever team he decided to join, the one who got the biggest Christmas presents. Me? I was the afterthought, the kid who got a pat on the head and was sent to his room when company came over. Growing up, I learned to stop expecting things. If I got a gift, it was usually something Jacob had outgrown. Birthdays? A half-hearted, "Oh yeah, happy birthday," if they even remembered. But if Jacob wanted something, it was like the red carpet rolled out. New bike? Done. Summer camp? No problem. He even got a dog once, a golden retriever named Max. I begged for a pet for years, but apparently I wasn't responsible enough. Jacob lost interest in Max after a few months. And guess who ended up walking and feeding him? By the time I was 7, my parents made it clear they had better things to do than raise me. One day, my mom packed up my stuff, what little of it she considered worth taking, and drove me to my grandmother's house 2 states away. No explanation, no heartfelt goodbyes, just the unspoken agreement that I was someone else's problem now. I remember sitting in the back seat, clutching my backpack, watching the highway stretch ahead, wondering if I'd done something to deserve this. But even at that age, I kind of knew the answer. And wasn't the warm, cookie-baking grandma you see in commercials. But she was solid. No nonsense, no coddling, but always there. She put food on the table, made sure I did my homework, and never let me feel sorry for myself. When I asked her why my parents sent me away, she didn't sugarcoat it. "Some people aren't cut out for parenting," she said, handing me a plate of spaghetti. "But that's their loss, not yours." I didn't hear much from my folks after that. They never called, never sent birthday cards. The only time I saw them was an occasional Facebook post of Jacob winning another award, standing in front of a new car, grinning with that perfect life they'd built without me. Meanwhile, I grew up in a tiny 2-bedroom house that smelled like old books and lemon-scented cleaning spray. And the idea of fun Saturday was dragging me to flea markets and estate sales, teaching me how to spot a good deal. Money was always tight, but I knew how to stretch a dollar. We didn't eat out much, but she made the best grilled cheese sandwiches on the planet. Crispy, buttery, with just the right amount of cheese pull. She taught me how to cook because a man who can't feed himself is just waiting to be someone else's burden. It stuck with me, more than I realized at the time. By the time I was 16, I had 3 part-time jobs. Stocking shelves at a grocery store, washing dishes at a diner, and running deliveries for a local bakery. And hated it. Said I was working too much for a kid, but I didn't see another choice. If I wanted something, I had to earn it myself. At 17, I bought my first car, a used Honda Civic that had more rust than paint, but it ran, well, most of the time. I learned how to fix basic things, change a tire, replace spark plugs, even unclog a fuel line after it left me stranded outside a gas station once, and just shook her head and said, "Well, now you know." When I graduated high school, I knew better than to expect a celebration. No banners, no proud family dinners. Just an clapping from the bleachers, and that was enough. College wasn't an option, and did her best. But tuition money doesn't just appear out of thin air, and I wasn't about to grovel to parents who had made it clear I wasn't their responsibility. So I took the next logical step. I worked. I started out stocking shelves at a local grocery store, then moved to washing dishes at a diner. Nothing glamorous, but it kept the lights on. I learned how to stretch a paycheck, how to make a meal out of next to nothing, how to live without waiting for someone to hand me anything. The diner was where I really started paying attention to cooking. I watched the line cooks work their magic, picked up little tricks, how to dice an onion fast without losing a finger, how to flip a pancake without turning it into a crime scene. Something about it felt right, like I had control over something, even if it was just a plate of food. I started experimenting at home. Sometimes it was a disaster, sometimes I nailed it, and humored me, even when I set off the smoke alarm trying to make homemade fries. One night, after I made dinner and put down her fork and said, "You ever think about making this a career?" I laughed it off. Cooking wasn't a real career, not for someone like me. But she just gave me that look, the one that meant she had a plan brewing. She noticed. She always noticed. And one day, she made a call. There was this fancy restaurant in town, the kind of place that charged more for a steak than I made in a week. One of her old friends had a connection there, and somehow she convinced him to give me a shot. Not as a cook, obviously, but as a busboy. Still, it was a foot in the door, and in a place like that, doors didn't open easily. The night before my first shift, I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd make a fool of myself. I imagined dropping a tray of expensive glasses, getting yelled at by some fancy chef with French accent, or just freezing up altogether. But the next morning, I threw on my only decent shirt, slicked back my hair, and walked to the restaurant, my stomach in knots. I stood outside that restaurant on my first day, staring at the polished windows, the people inside dressed in clothes I could never afford, looking like they belonged in a world I'd never been a part of. It felt like stepping into enemy territory, but I wasn't about to back down. I had nothing to lose, and for the first time in a long time, maybe something to gain. The restaurant job was nothing like I expected. It wasn't glamorous, that's for sure. The kitchen was always too hot, the floor always slick with something, and the air thick with the smell of garlic, butter, and whatever the special of the night was. My uniform, black slacks and a white button-up, never stayed clean for more than 10 minutes. But I liked it. The energy, the controlled chaos, the way a well-run dinner service felt like a perfectly choreographed performance. The staff was great too, mostly young people like me, hustling for tips, cracking jokes in the back, slipping each other extra bread rolls on long shifts. It felt like, for once, I was part of something, except for one person. The general manager, Mr. Grayson, ran the place like a dictator with a clipboard. He was the kind of guy who could make a grown man feel like a scolded child with just a look. He had this way of finding the smallest mistakes. Fingerprints on a wine glass, a plate not facing the right direction, and making you feel like you committed a felony. He loved reminding us that we were replaceable, that 100 people would kill for our jobs. The worst part? He had this fake charm for customers. Smiled, shook hands, laughed at their jokes. But the second they walked out the door, the mask came off, and he was back to barking orders and making people cry in the break room. I did my best to stay out of his way. I wasn't stupid. I kept my head down, worked hard, and didn't argue. But that didn't stop him from targeting me. Maybe he didn't like how I looked, or maybe he just needed someone to kick around. He called me kid in a way that made it clear he meant fool. If a customer complained about slow service, somehow it was my fault, even if I had nothing to do with it. If a plate got chipped, I was the one who must have mishandled it. I learned to grit my teeth and take it because I needed that job. The months dragged on, and Thanksgiving crept up before I knew it. And wasn't big on holidays, said they were just an excuse for stores to sell overpriced turkeys. But she still made a decent meal. I'd never gone back to my parents' house for Thanksgiving. Never felt like I had a reason to. But this year, I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to see if anything had changed. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't missing out on anything. So, against my better judgment, I went. The second I walked in, I knew I'd made a mistake. The house was just as I remembered. Huge, spotless, filled with expensive furniture no one actually sat on. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. And for a second, I let myself think maybe, just maybe, I'd feel like I belonged. Then I saw Jacob. He was standing in the middle of the living room, grinning like he owned the place. Which, to be fair, he probably would someday. And right there in the driveway, a brand new luxury car with a giant red bow on top. My parents hovered around him, beaming, like he'd just cured a disease instead of what? Getting rewarded for existing? I barely got a nod from my mom. My dad glanced up, gave me that look that said, "What are you doing here?" I should have left right then. Should have turned around, walked out, saved myself the trouble. But I didn't. I sat at the dinner table, listening to them praise Jacob, pretending not to notice how they barely acknowledged I was there. The food was great, but it tasted like nothing. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was stupidity, but somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the awkward silence, I asked, "Would you guys be able to help me out with school?" I wasn't asking for a handout, just a loan. I'd pay them back. I'd work my ass off, but my dad didn't even think about it. He just shook his head, said money was tight, said Jacob was going to business school, and that kind of education wasn't cheap. I nodded, pretending I understood, but I didn't, because outside, sitting in the driveway, was a brand new car that probably cost more than a year tuition. That was when I knew I didn't belong here. After dinner, I was about to leave when I heard them talking in the next room. My dad's voice low and sharp. "You remember, I never wanted to keep him. We should have given him back when Jacob was born. Now he's coming around asking for money like we owe him something? He's not even ours. He's a stranger." I stopped breathing. I stood there frozen while my mom mumbled something back. I didn't hear the rest. Didn't need to. My heart was hammering, so hard I thought they'd hear it. I wasn't theirs. I left. I don't even remember driving back to Ann's. My hand shook the whole way. My brain was screaming, trying to make sense of it. Was it true? Had I really spent my whole life thinking these people were my family when they weren't? I walked into Ann's house, slammed the door behind me. She looked up from her book, eyebrows raised. And before I could even ask, she knew. She sighed, put the book down, and told me the truth. "Your parents adopted you when they thought they couldn't have kids. They were happy at first. But when Jacob was born, things changed. They treated you like a problem instead of their son. And when you started getting older, they didn't want you around anymore. So they sent you to me." My head spun. She stood, walked over to an old wooden box on the shelf, pulled it open. Inside was something small and silver, something I'd never seen before. She placed it in my hand. A badge, old, heavy, with 2 letters carved into it. GG. This was left with you at the orphanage. No one knew what it meant. I stared at it, my fingers curling around the cold metal. I didn't know what it meant either. But suddenly, it felt like the only thing that mattered. I had to find out the truth. And I wasn't going to stop until I did. Working at the restaurant had its ups and downs. The fast pace kept me from overthinking. The staff, minus management, was solid, and I got free meals when the kitchen had extras. But some nights, after a long shift, exhaustion hit me like a freight train. My feet ached, my back screamed, and all I wanted was to go home, collapse on a couch, and maybe stare at the ceiling for a while. That night was one of those nights. The rain had started in the afternoon and never let up. By the time my shift ended, the alley behind the restaurant was practically a river. I grabbed a trash bag, pushed open the back door, and immediately regretted it. Sheets of cold rain pounded the pavement, soaking everything in seconds. I made a run for the dumpster, heaved the bag inside, and was about to dash back in when I saw him. An old man sat on the curb just past the alley, hunched over, his thin coat doing nothing against the downpour. His hands trembled as he held them close to his chest. At first, I thought he was just another guy down on his luck. The city had plenty of them, people who'd lost too much and never found their way back. But there was something different about him. He wasn't just waiting out the rain. He looked lost. I hesitated. Maybe it wasn't my problem. Maybe I should just go inside, clock out, and pretend I hadn't seen him. But something in my gut wouldn't let me. I stepped closer. "Hey, you okay? You need help." The man lifted his head. His face was lined with age, deep-set wrinkles telling stories of years I'd never know. His eyes held something I recognized. That look of someone who'd been thrown away. "Not from here," he mumbled. "Just traveling. Lost more than I had to give." His voice was hoarse, rough around the edges. The kind of voice that had known too many cigarettes, too many cold nights. I didn't know what to say to that. I just knew I couldn't leave him there. "Come on," I said, nodding toward the restaurant. "You'll freeze out here." He hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the employee break room wasn't much. A couple of plastic chairs, a dented fridge, and a table that wobbled if you leaned on it wrong. But it was dry, and the air smelled like coffee and warm bread. I grabbed my dinner from the fridge, leftover steak and mashed potatoes I'd packed before my shift, and slid across the table to him. Eat. You need it more than I do. For a second, he just looked at me, like he was trying to figure out if I was real. Then, without a word, he picked up the fork and started eating. Slow at first, like he didn't trust it, then faster. I looked away, giving him that dignity. While he ate, I leaned against the counter, sipping on an old cup of coffee I found in the break room. It was lukewarm at best, but it kept my hands busy. You got a name? I finally asked. He swallowed, wiped his mouth on the sleeve of his coat. Walter. Nice to meet you, Walter. I'm Alex. Walter nodded, like he was filing that information away somewhere. Been on the road a long time, he murmured. Looking for something. Never seemed to find it. I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, the door slammed open. What the hell is this? I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Mr. Larson, the general manager, had the worst timing on the planet. He was the kind of guy who walked like he was always about to fire someone. He was outside in the rain. I said, keeping my voice even. This is a restaurant, not a shelter. Larson snapped. Do you have any idea how bad this looks? Customers see some bum hanging around, and suddenly they don't feel safe eating here. My hands clenched under the table. He's not some bum. He's a person, and he's not bothering anyone. Larson scoffed. You think this is some charity? You don't get to decide who eats here. He grabbed Walter's sleeve, yanking him up. Get out, now. I didn't think. I just moved. My hand shot out, grabbing Larson's wrist. Don't touch him. For a second, everything froze. Larson's face twisted with fury, his mouth opening like he was about to unload a lecture on how replaceable I was. Instead, he just said 2 words. You're fired. Silence. Walter looked at me. I looked at him. Then, without a word, I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and turned to leave. Come on, I said to Walter. We're both out of a job now. Might as well figure out what's next. And with that, I stepped out into the rain, the door slamming shut behind me. The cold hit me instantly, soaking through my shirt, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, trying to process what just happened. I just lost my job, probably the only stable thing in my life. And yet, I didn't regret it. Walter shuffled beside me, his breath visible in the freezing air. Didn't have to do that, kid. I shrugged. Yeah, well, some things are worth getting fired over. We stood there for a moment before I sighed. Come on, let's get out of the rain. I know a place where we can get some coffee. Walter gave me a look like he was trying to figure me out. Then he nodded. Sounds good. We walked down the empty street, the neon signs flickering, the rain tapping against the pavement. I had no idea what was next, but for the first time in a long time, I had a feeling it was going to matter. The rain hadn't let up, and by the time Walter and I reached the nearest cafe, we were soaked. The bell above the door jingled as we stepped inside, a wave of warmth and the smell of fresh coffee washing over us. The place was small, one of those old-school diners with cracked leather booths and a counter lined with mismatched stools. The kind of spot where truckers stopped at 3 a.m. and where the coffee was always a little burnt but strong enough to keep you awake for days. Walter shook off his coat, sending a spray of rainwater onto the checkered floor. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Linda, gave him a look but didn't say anything. I figured she'd seen worse. I slid into a booth, motioning for Walter to sit across from me. He hesitated, then dropped into the seat with a sigh. His hands rubbed against the cracked Formica table, like he was feeling something he hadn't in a while. A little comfort, a little normalcy. Linda strolled over, pad in hand. What'll it be, hun? I glanced at the menu, even though I already knew. 2 coffees, and whatever donuts you got left. Linda nodded, scribbling it down. Rough night? Something like that. She gave me a knowing look and walked away. A few minutes later, she was back, setting down 2 steaming mugs and a plate stacked with glazed donuts that looked like they'd been sitting out a little too long. I didn't care. I slid the plate toward Walter. Eat. He didn't argue. He grabbed a donut, took a bite, and closed his eyes like it was the best thing he'd had in years. Maybe it was. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, staring at the dark liquid inside. My whole body still buzzed with leftover adrenaline from the fight with Larson. I'd lost my job just like that. And for what? A guy I didn't even know? But even as I thought it, I knew the answer. It wasn't about Walter. It was about not being the kind of person who looked the other way. About not becoming like the people who had written me off like I didn't matter. Walter wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then looked at me. You did right, kid. People forget that sometimes, but it matters. I exhaled, shaking my head. Yeah, well, doing right doesn't pay the rent. Walter chuckled. No, it doesn't, but it makes looking in the mirror easier. I pulled my wallet out and flipped it open. Not much left. A couple of crumpled bills, some change. I slid what I had across the table. Here, get yourself a motel for the night. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest. Walter looked at the money, then at me. You sure? I shrugged. Not like I got much else to do. He took the cash, stuffing it into his coat pocket. Guess that makes two of us. For a while, we just sat there, the hum of the diner filling the silence. The jukebox in the corner flickered to life, playing an old country song that no one had picked. But somehow it fit the moment. Outside, the rain tapped against the windows, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Then Walter's gaze shifted, landing on the badge pinned to my jacket. His face changed, his usual tired expression replaced by something sharper. Where'd you get that? I glanced down. The old silver badge with the letters GG, engraved in an ornate script. The only thing I had from my real mother. It's all I have from my birth family, I said. My grandmother gave it to me, said it was left with me at the orphanage. Walter's brows furrowed. You sure about that? I nodded. Why? He leaned back, running a hand over his face. Because I've seen that before. My stomach tightened. Where? He hesitated, then sighed. A few weeks ago, I passed through a town upstate. There was a big estate, one of those old money places. Gates tall enough to keep out God himself. Had that same emblem on the front. Same letters. Didn't think much of it at the time. Just another rich family with too much history. My hands clenched under the table. You're sure? Walter nodded. Absolutely. It was the kind of place you don't forget. Looked like a damn castle. I stared at the badge, my heart pounding. All these years, I had nothing. No leads. No names. Just a tiny metal badge and a past that felt like a locked door. And now I had a key. I swallowed hard, looking back at Walter. Where was it? The estate? He rubbed his chin. Couple hours north of here. Don't remember the exact town, but I could find it again. I leaned back in the booth, exhaling slowly. This was real. This was something. For years, I'd accepted that my past was a mystery I'd never solve. Now, in the most unexpected way possible, I had a lead. The coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. I felt the weight of the badge in my palm, rubbing my thumb over the engraved letters. GG. What did they stand for? A name? A place? Walter finished the last of his donut, wiped his hands on a napkin. If you want to go, I'll take you. I looked at him, surprised. You don't have to do that. He smirked. Kid, I don't got anywhere else to be. Besides, I like a good mystery. I laughed, shaking my head. All right, guess we're taking a road trip. Walter grinned. Guess we are. I tossed a few bucks on the table for Linda, then stood, shrugging on my damp jacket. The rain was still coming down, but this time I didn't mind. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just running away from the past. I was chasing it. And I wasn't going to stop until I found the truth. The next morning, the weight of the previous night sat heavy on my chest. I'd barely slept, my mind spinning with possibilities. I had spent my whole life assuming my past was a dead end, a locked door without a key. And then, out of nowhere, Walter handed me a lead. A real one. And watched me from the kitchen table, her coffee steaming in front of her. She didn't say anything at first, just studied me the way she always did when she knew something big was brewing. I finally spilled everything. Walter, the estate, the matching emblem. Her face barely changed, but I saw in her eyes. Worry. You sure about this? She finally asked. I wasn't, but what choice did I have? I had spent years thinking I didn't belong anywhere. If there was even a chance that this estate held answers, I had to take it. So, a few hours later, Walter and I were back on the road. The drive was quiet, aside from the occasional directions from Walter. The roads twisted through small towns and long stretches of countryside, places that felt untouched by time. We made a pit stop at a roadside diner where Walter insisted on grabbing a proper meal before what he called a life-changing moment. I barely touched my food. My stomach was in knots. Relax, kid, Walter said, slurping his coffee. Ain't like you're robbing the place. Easy for him to say. He wasn't about to walk into a mansion and potentially turn his entire world upside down. Finally, just past noon, we found it. The estate loomed in the distance, hidden behind towering iron gates. The emblem was there, just like Walter had said, those same 2 letters, GG, intricately carved into the metal. The place looked straight out of an old Hollywood film. Long, sweeping driveways, perfectly trimmed hedges, and a mansion big enough to fit 10 of Anne's houses inside. Walter let out a low whistle. Well, kid, looks like you found your pass. I swallowed hard, my palms slick with sweat. Guess so. Walter put the car in park and turned to me. This is where I leave you. I blinked. What? He gave me a small, tired smile. I was just passing through, remember? You got a road ahead of you. Mine somewhere else. A lump formed in my throat. I barely knew this guy, but somehow it felt like losing an old friend. Where will you go? Walter shrugged. Wherever the road takes me. I didn't know what to say, so I just stuck out my hand. He looked at it for a second before shaking it, his grip firm but warm. Find out who you are, kid. You deserve to know. And with that, he was gone. I stood there for a long time, watching his car disappear down the road. Then I turned back to the gates. Time to face whatever was waiting on the other side. I walked up to the intercom, my fingers shaking as I pressed a button. A crackling voice came through. Yes? Can I help you? I cleared my throat. I need to speak to the owners. It's about family. There was a pause. Then the gate buzzed, slowly swinging open. A butler met me at the entrance, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He didn't ask questions, just led me through halls lined with paintings and chandeliers that looked older than the country itself. Everything in this house screamed wealth, like the kind of money that had never known struggle, never had to count pennies at the grocery store. Finally, we stopped in a grand sitting room, and that's when I saw her. Elizabeth. She was elegant, the kind of woman who carried herself like she belonged in a different century. But when her eyes landed on the badge in my hands, something cracked in her expression. She staggered forward, her hands trembling. Where did you get that? My throat went dry. It was left with me when I was a baby, at the orphanage. Her eyes welled with tears. She covered her mouth, shaking her head. No, it can't be. My heart pounded. Are you my mother? Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. I think so. Silence stretched between us, thick with emotions I couldn't name. Finally, she motioned for me to sit, and then, in a voice heavy with regret, she told me everything. Years ago, she had fallen in love with a man outside her world, a working-class boy with kind eyes and big dreams. But her family had never approved. When she found out she was pregnant, her parents gave her a choice: give up the baby or give up her inheritance. She had been ready to fight, ready to choose love over money. But when the man she loved realized there was no payday waiting for him, he left. She had never felt more alone. Her family was relentless. They sent her away, made arrangements, and in the end, she had given up her son, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. The only thing she could do was leave a piece of herself behind, the badge, a way for him to find her if fate allowed. Tears streamed down her face. I tried to find you, years later, but the orphanage burned down, records lost. I thought you were gone forever. My stomach twisted. My whole life had been shaped by decisions I never even knew about. And now here she was, my mother, a stranger. And yet something inside me whispered that maybe, just maybe, I had finally found where I belonged. Walking into that house, it felt like stepping into a different world. Now, sitting at the long dining table, surrounded by my newfound family, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an outsider in my own life. The chandeliers above us cast a golden glow over the room, and the air smelled like expensive wine and roasted lamb. Everything in this place was polished, curated, perfect. Elizabeth sat at the head of the table, her eyes never straying far from me. She had barely let go of my hand since our conversation in the sitting room. Across from me sat her husband, Philip Graves, a man who radiated quiet authority. He wasn't what I expected. I had assumed someone in his position, wealthy, powerful, married to a woman with a complicated past, would be cold or distant. But there was warmth in his expression, and ease in the way he listened. "Alex, we want you to know your family now," Philip said. "That means whatever dreams you have, whatever path you want to take, we're here to support you." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent my entire life clawing my way through every obstacle, assuming I had no safety net. Now, suddenly, I had one. Across the table, another voice chimed in. "And that means you've got a brother now, too." I turned to see Lucas, my newly discovered half-brother, grinning at me. He was around my age, sharp-dressed, but with a laid-back attitude that made him instantly likable. "Hope you're ready for that, man. I don't go easy on new recruits." Something about the way he said it made me chuckle. Guess I'll have to keep up then. Lucas leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Oh, you will. And first lesson, no more of this struggling way to routine. You're stepping into a new world. And lucky for you, you've got me to show you the ropes." I could tell he was joking, but there was an undercurrent of truth to it. My life had changed overnight, and I had a lot to learn. The next few months felt like stepping into a whirlwind. Philip, true to his word, made sure I had every opportunity one could dream of. I enrolled in an elite business school, something I had once thought impossible. I had tutors, mentors, access to a network of people who had spent their lives navigating the world of power and influence. It was overwhelming at first. I wasn't used to this kind of privilege, and part of me resisted it. But the deeper I got into my studies, the more I realized something. The restaurant business was in my blood. The Graves family owned a chain of high-end restaurants, not just across the country, but internationally. I had spent years thinking my passion for food and hospitality came from nowhere, but now it all made sense. It was part of me, whether I had known it or not. Still, even as I built this new life, I never forgot where I came from. I made sure and was taken care of, bought her a house, set up a fund so she would never have to worry about money again. But I did it quietly. I didn't want my old family, the ones who had thrown me away, to suddenly come knocking, pretending to care. 2 years passed faster than I could have imagined. And then on my birthday, Elizabeth gave me a gift I never saw coming. She handed me a folder, a small smile on her lips. "I think it's time you had something of your own." I opened it and froze. It was a deed to a restaurant. Not just any restaurant. The restaurant where I had worked. The place where I had been humiliated. Where I had been thrown out like I was nothing. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. "This is ours." Elizabeth nodded. "It always was. The Graves family has owned that location for years. We lease it out to different operators. But now it's yours." A slow smile spread across my face. "I think I need to make a visit." A week later, I walked into the restaurant dressed simply, jeans, a sweater, nothing that screamed rich owner. The place looked the same, though now it felt different. The moment I stepped inside, I saw him. The manager. The same one who had fired me all those years ago. His smug face twisted into a smirk when he saw me. Well, he sneered. "Back to beg for your old job? Where's your friend?" I kept my expression neutral. Actually, I'm here to check on my investment. He let out a short, mocking laugh. Your investment? Buddy, this place is out of your league. I pulled out my phone, dialed a number, and handed it to him. He rolled his eyes but took the call. A second later, I saw the color drain from his face. Yes, sir, he stammered. Right away, sir. He handed the phone back, his hand shaking. The entire restaurant had gone quiet, staff and customers alike watching the scene unfold. Someone even had their phone out, recording. He tried to say something, some pathetic excuse, but before he could, he turned and bolted out the back door. He knew this was his last day here. A slow round of applause started. Employees grinned, exchanging knowing looks. One of the servers stepped forward. A woman I remembered, one who had always been kind to the staff. Her name was Sarah. So what now? I smiled. Now we make some changes. A few days later, the restaurant had a new manager, Sarah, who had always treated people right, who had worked her way up and deserved a real shot. As I handed her the keys, she shook her head in disbelief. Are you sure about this? Absolutely. This place needs a real leader. Someone who understands what it means to work here. She beamed. Then let's make it the best restaurant in the city. I grinned. That's the plan. And just like that, the place that had once been a symbol of my lowest point had become something else entirely. A new beginning. A new life. It started with a few shares on social media. Then, overnight, it exploded. The video of me returning to the restaurant as its new owner spread like wildfire. Clips of the moment I handed the phone to the former manager, his face going pale as he realized who he was speaking to, racked up millions of views. The internet ate it up. People loved a good underdog story. Former waiter buys the restaurant that fired him, made for a headline too juicy to ignore. I tried to brush it off, but the buzz didn't die down. Customers flooded the restaurant, wanted to see the place where it all happened. Journalists called nonstop. Even TV networks wanted a piece of the story. It was overwhelming, but I handled it. Business was booming, and for once in my life, I felt like I had real control. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message I never expected. My old family had seen it. I hadn't heard from them in years. Not a birthday call. Not a text. Nothing. Now, suddenly, I was important enough to reach out to. First, it was a couple of ignored messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Then, a few missed calls from my old home number. I let them all go to voicemail. But then, my father sent an email. We need to talk. Please come by the house. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it without responding. But another part of me knew this moment was inevitable. I had spent too much of my life letting them have power over me. If I was going to move on, I had to face them. Not for them. For me. So I went. Their house hadn't changed. The same perfect lawn. The same expensive cars in the driveway. The same feeling of coldness that followed me every time I walked through that door as a kid. My father opened the door, forcing a tight smile. Alex, it's been a long time. I stepped inside. My mother was there too, standing near the living room, hands clasped in front of her like she wasn't sure what to do with them. The walls were covered in framed pictures. Jacob's graduation, Jacob's football trophies, Jacob's vacations. My name, my face, my existence, nowhere to be seen. I should have expected it, but somehow it still stung. We sat in the living room, and they looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe because I was. We saw the news. My father finally said, "You've done well for yourself." I didn't respond. I just waited. My mother cleared her throat. We want to reach out sooner, but we didn't know how. We've missed you. We're still family, you know. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. No, we're not. She flinched like she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. I spent years wanting you to be my family, I continued. But when you had the choice, you threw me away. You made it clear I wasn't yours the moment Jacob was born. And now that I don't need you, now that I have something you respect, you suddenly want to talk. My father's jaw tightened. It wasn't like that. We were young, we made mistakes, but we still cared about you. I let out a sharp laugh, shaking my head. Cared about me? You sent me away like I was a problem you didn't want to deal with, and you never looked back. Silence. They had nothing to say because they knew I was right. My mother's voice wavered. We just want to move forward, to be a family again. I stood up. You lost that chance a long time ago. I have a family now. A real one. They watched as I walked to the door. No one stopped me. No one called after me. Because deep down they knew the truth. I wasn't their son. Not anymore. I left my old family's house and never looked back. The weight I had carried for years, the anger, the resentment, the longing for something they would never give me, was finally gone. I had closed that chapter. For good. When I got back home, my real home, I was welcomed with open arms. Elizabeth hugged me tight, as if she could make up for all the years we had lost in that one embrace. Philip patted me on the back, giving me a nod that said he was proud of me, even if the words never left his mouth. Lucas, always a joker, just smirked and said, "Took you long enough to get rid of the dead weight." It was strange at first, stepping into a world where I truly belonged. A world where people cared about me without conditions. I had spent so long fighting for scraps of love and recognition that I didn't know how to handle the real thing when it was freely given. But I was learning. The business world was an entirely different beast. My last few years have been spent studying, learning the ins and outs of high-level management, sitting in on meetings where deals worth millions were made over glasses of bourbon. But nothing prepared me for the real thing. I was expected to navigate charity galas, networking events, business negotiations where every handshake meant something. People who had ignored me before suddenly wanted to know me. It was amusing to watch their expressions shift when they realized I was Graves now. I had power, status, but I never forgot where I came from. While I built my career, I made sure to stay grounded. I visited and as often as I could. I didn't want her to feel like I had outgrown her, like she had been just a temporary stop on my way up. If anything, she was the only reason I had made it this far. One evening, I surprised her with a new house. Nothing too flashy, just a beautiful, cozy home in a quiet neighborhood with a big garden. Something she had always wanted but never allowed herself to dream about. She had fought me on it. Of course. "I don't need all this, Alex," she had said, shaking her head. But I saw the tears in her eyes when she walked through the front door. "This isn't about need," I told her. "It's about giving you the life you deserve." She wiped her eyes and nodded. "You always were too stubborn for your own good." I laughed. I learned from the best. There was one more person I needed to find. Walter. It wasn't hard. When you have money, finding someone is just a few phone calls away. Within a week, I tracked him down to the shelter. I spoke to the director, got some background, and made sure he was okay before I approached him. Walter was staying at a local homeless shelter, one of those places that did their best with limited resources. It wasn't much, but it kept him off the streets. When I walked in, I spotted him in the corner, sipping on a cup of weak coffee. It took him a second to realize I was standing there. He looked older, more tired, but the moment he saw me, his face lit up with recognition. "Well, look who's still kicking," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Didn't think I'd see you again, kid." I grinned. "Yeah, well, I owed you a visit." I took him out to dinner that night, and over burgers and fries, I told him everything, how my life had changed, how I had found my real family, how I had finally made peace with my past. And then I handed him an envelope. He frowned. "What's this?" "Keys," I said simply. "To your new shop." He blinked at me. "My what?" I took a deep breath. "You told me once that you used to work in a garage, that fixing cars was the only thing that ever made sense to you. You said if life had gone differently, you'd have had a shop of your own. So now you do." His hand shook as he opened the envelope, pulling out the lease papers. His eyes scanned the words, but he wasn't really reading. He just kept shaking his head. "I can't take this, Alex," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "This is too much." "No, it's not," I said firmly. "You were the one who showed me that people can change each other's lives with just a little kindness. You didn't owe me anything, but you gave me a reason to believe that people still look out for each other. That mattered more than you know. Now, it's my turn to do the same for you. This is me paying it forward." Walter exhaled shakily, looking down at the papers. Then, to my absolute shock, he wiped at his eyes. "Haven't had much to call my own in a long time," he muttered. "Didn't think I ever would again." I clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Well, now you do." Before Walter could start fresh, I made sure he had a place to stay. I rented him an apartment, paid the lease for a year up front, and made sure he had enough money to get by until the shop started making profits. Then, the next week, I drove him to see the garage for the first time. It was a proper shop, clean, fully equipped, with a sign out front that read Walter's Auto Repair. He stood there, staring at it like he didn't believe it was real. Then, without a word, he walked inside, running his hand over the freshly painted walls, the brand-new tool sets, the lift in the center of the shop. Finally, he turned to me. "I don't know what to say." I shrugged. "Then don't say anything. Just do what you do best." For the first time since I met him, Walter was speechless, but the look in his eyes said everything. As I walked away that night, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from anything. Not from my past. Not from the people who had hurt me. Not from the idea that I wasn't enough. I had a family that loved me. A business that I was building. People I cared about who cared about me in return. My life wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living. And I planned to make every moment count.